Welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations Live. I'm your host, Pierre Quinn, and here on Courageous Conversations, we leverage the stories of leaders, of creatives, of entrepreneurs to help you live and lead with greater courage. I am excited to hang out with you on this episode of Courageous Conversations because I am joined by Kris Kelso. Kris, thanks for being my guest today.
You're welcome, Pierre. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and glad to be talking with your audience.
I know we're going to have a great chat today. So if you're stopping the scroll and hanging out with us, we need you to do a couple of things. First, feel free to check in with us. We love giving you shout outs, especially on LinkedIn, but we know some of you are tuning in on Facebook and YouTube as well. We'd love for you to check in with us. Even if you're watching the replay, drop your name in the comments so that we can follow up with you. The second one is, I know you're going to have some questions for Kris. He has an incredible story, incredible journey. He's written a fantastic book. So as those questions pop into your mind, pop them into the comment section. We'd love to answer them. And the third one is really simple. You know, it's Friday as we're recording this, and Friday is a perfect day for giving. You don't want to keep this great conversation to yourself. So go ahead and hit that share button so someone else can experience it. Okay, Kris, get us started. Get us started. Give us that 30-second, that 60-second maybe elevator pitch. If we're standing in line at Starbucks and I turn around and say, hey, so what do you do? How would you respond to that question?
I would say I'm a two-time entrepreneur, founded two different companies and ran those businesses. But I have really shifted over the last 5 or 6 years to working independently with other entrepreneurs. And I help them to get clarity around what's most important, to set some clear goals and plans, and then to build accountability structures so that they will execute on those things and eliminate the distractions that want to draw them away from what's most important in their business. So I work one-on-one with typically owners of small businesses between 1 and 25 million in revenue. And then occasionally I'll work with the entire leadership team, helping them to coalesce as a team, to communicate more effectively, to set clear goals and execute on those plans as a team.
You know, as we are shifting, some organizations are shifting to the physical workplace after being virtual for so long and trying to figure out how to make all of this work. I know a lot of things that you just said will really resonate because they're looking, how do we minimize distractions and build cohesion? So I want to get into that in just a little bit, but we got to hop in the time machine as one of our Courageous Conversation alums, Candace, is checking in with us. Candace, it's good to see you. Good to see you this morning. Let's hop in the time machine, Kris, and let's go back. Let's go back. You know, do this LinkedIn stalking. So we kind of look at profiles and see what people have been up to in their career. Tell me about life in the IT world.
Well, my career has been a twisty, turny journey that has been driven a lot by my passions and curiosity, really. I was a software developer 20 years ago, did a lot in the healthcare industry, building software systems and working with healthcare data. And then in about 2007, I got the bug to become an entrepreneur. And that is after a long period of saying I would never own a business. I had no interest or desire in running my own company. I didn't want the risk and the headaches and all the things that go with running a business. I just wanted to stay focused on my skills and what I enjoy doing. And it was literally as though one day I woke up and a switch flipped and nothing else made sense to me except to go out on my own, to do my own thing, to build my own business. And so with no prior business education, with no real business experience, I made the leap. And in fact, I remember going to a large bookstore and buying a stack of books covering anything I thought I needed to know to run a business, from finances and legal stuff to marketing and sales and how to scope a consulting engagement, because I was starting a consulting firm. And I just read all those books and kind of dove in and got to work. So I've been very much self-educated, and that's kind of been a pattern in my life. Is when I become fascinated with something or I have an interest, I'll go just dig in and self-educate and then figure out a way to incorporate it into my work. So my first company was an IT consulting firm. I grew that to several million in revenue and had a team of mostly former IT directors or CIO level people. And we would go into companies that were struggling to implement technology well, and in particular, struggling with IT people and the tech workforce and getting them communicating effectively and working well. And that's where sort of this interest in what I do today of focusing on helping people communicate well and set clear goals and execute against those things. That's where that kind of began, because I began a shift mentally, my own self, from focusing on the tech to realizing that the tech is just a means to an end. The technology is just the tools you use to get something done. And I began to really focus on the business objectives and building healthy companies and healthy teams. And then I noticed a pattern where we would go to work at a company and really help improve their IT department, and literally took it in some cases from worst to first, where an owner would go from saying IT is where ideas go to die, is what I used to hear from business owners, to when we were done, they would say IT is the standard by which we measure every other department in the company. Wow. And we would do this great work, but if there was dysfunction elsewhere in the organization, there would be a natural entropy to our work, that the great things we would do would be eroded by dysfunction, especially if it was at the very top level of the organization. So I made a decision several years back as we were doing that IT work that eventually I wanted to work at the very top level of organizations. I wanted to affect change with the owners, the board of directors, the investors, and the C-suite. And so over a series of years, I sort of made some moves and got some additional education and training that helped me to put myself in a position where I could work directly with business owners, which is what I do today.
Elijah checking in with us, Candace as well, who said, I remember that leap into entrepreneurship. And so many of us remember that. Elijah and Candace are Courageous Conversations alums checking in with us on LinkedIn. That space, you said that you would never do that.
Yeah.
And you ended up there. And I know that some people who are watching this, maybe their space is in entrepreneurship. Maybe it's in taking a leadership role in their company. There are some people who have been extremely technically proficient. They're good at their project, working by themselves. And then the company wants to pull them into this leadership role where they're getting them done through people. What are some of the common mistakes that individuals make as they make that transition to being the frontline hands-on to coaching the people who are doing the frontline hands-on work?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see people and organizations make is assuming that a proficiency in a skill automatically makes you qualified to manage and lead people who are doing that skill, right? And organizations will take their top technology person, their top software developer, and make them the manager of software development. Or I see it a lot in sales. They take their top salesperson and make them the head of sales. And if there's not a shift in mindset and there's not a training and education about leadership and management that goes on, then what happens is you take your best performer out of their role and you put them in a role that they're not great and not prepared for. And it's a lose-lose, because you lose your top salesman and you get a poor sales manager. So the lesson there is not that you can't promote people or that people can't move. It's that there's a different mindset and a different level of education and learning and development that has to happen to make the shift, because leadership is a skill. Management is a skill unto itself that's different than doing the thing that you're managing. And so just recognizing that, and in the same way that I said, okay, I want to become an entrepreneur, I don't have what I need. I'm going to go educate myself. I'm going to go learn. I'm going to go draw. I'm going to seek out other people and try to develop those skills. Someone who wants to be in leadership, you may think, I don't have what it takes. Well, none of us have what it takes until we go get what it takes. So put a plan in place to go educate yourself, to go learn, to get a coach, to get a mentor, to get some education, some training, and develop those skills and grow into that role, rather than just making the assumption that I'm a great software developer, so I can manage the whole software team. It doesn't translate that way.
I was reading Deloitte's human capital trends report from 2019. And in the survey, the respondents said 80+% said that leadership is important for their organization, but only 25% said that they felt like they were in a space where they were adequately training leaders to do the world that we're in today. And I know for the longest time, there was this idea that people development and talent development was this extra thing that we do that takes away from or interferes with the work. Are you finding it to be the same today, where organizations are pushing back and saying this is an additional thing, or are you finding more organizations saying, no, this is an integral part of the actual work, developing our people?
It's an interesting question. You're asking me what I'm seeing, because I'm going to acknowledge up front that I have a bias, because the people the companies I work with are hiring a coach, are hiring leadership development. So it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, I see that companies are recognizing the need for this. And at the same time, the companies that are not bringing me in, so I don't have that kind of exposure. So I want to acknowledge that sort of bias based on what I do before I just say, oh yes, it's absolutely happening. But I definitely have seen some shifts in mindset, particularly with owners of small businesses, where they've been the primary leader and they've run the organization and had a flat org structure, and they get to a certain point, whether it's $3, $5, $10 million in revenue, or a certain size of employees, where they start to realize, I can't continue to be the only leader in the organization, and I've got to raise people up. And that's so much more than just promoting and giving them a title and some responsibility. There's a leadership development component that has to happen. And sometimes they learn that lesson through failure by promoting people that don't work out. Other times they see it and get ahead of it and start to work on developing those leaders well in advance, and then building them into those roles that they need.
It was a key part of leadership development and maintaining executive excellence that we don't talk about. And I remember several years ago, I had a conversation with Lolly Daskell on the Leading While Green podcast. Be on soon. And Lolly says in her executive coaching work, somewhere around 90 to 95% of C-suite executives live with the fear that one day somebody's going to walk into their office and say, gotcha, you're not as smart as everyone thinks you are. And that they wrestle with this feeling of the imposter syndrome. Can you talk to us about that notion and how your book developed?
Absolutely. So imposter syndrome, for anyone who's not familiar, which more and more people are hearing about this and talking about this these days, but it's a pattern of thinking where a person sort of systematically doubts their own accomplishments and their own success. And what happens is a person will look at Pierre and say, well, he's successful because he's smart and savvy, and he seems to make all the right moves, and he's got a plan and he executes it well, and he just really has it together and knows what he's doing. But my success has involved a lot of luck and timing, and some things just sort of fell my way. And boy, I sure have made a lot of mistakes and had to learn the hard way and managed to figure out a way through it. But the fear, the underlying fear, is that at some point, as you said, somebody is going to figure out that I'm just making it up as I go, that I'm just figuring it out along the way, that I don't really fully know what I'm doing. And that if that happens, if someone figures that out, I'm going to be exposed as a fraud. And suddenly everybody's going to go, oh, wait a minute, you're not the expert we thought you were. And studies have shown that up to 70 or 80% of the population experiences imposter syndrome at some point in their career. So it's a very common feeling, but that fear of being exposed, that fear of being discovered, prevents us from talking about it. So not a lot of people are willing to sort of raise their hand and say, yeah, I have this doubt. I have this self-doubt, because we think that's going to trigger the exposure, and everyone's going to go, wait, you have self-doubt? You must not know what you're doing. But statistically and empirically, I can tell you that many, many people struggle with those feelings at times. And I certainly did early in my career, especially my entrepreneurial career, as I started that business and I started growing, and I was hiring people that were smarter than me, more educated than me, more experienced than me. I was going into, Fortune 50 companies and helping them with their IT strategy, where I had never been a CIO, or, I had been a manager of software development team. And suddenly I'm in a boardroom with executives talking about the technology and how it affects their business. And so there were times I felt in over my head, but like many people, I didn't feel comfortable talking about that. I felt like it was just me. And when I discovered imposter syndrome, when I learned about it, first of all, it was a huge relief just to know what it is and know that psychologists, have labeled it a thing and have studied it, and that many people experience it. But as I began to dig in, I learned that, number one, it's more prevalent among high achievers. And that's counterintuitive. You would think that really successful, really aggressive, really progressive and innovative people would be less likely to have self-doubt. But in fact, they're more likely. And the reason is because these are the people that are pushing themselves outside their comfort zone. These are the people that are routinely and regularly trying something new and trying to create something that doesn't exist and trying to learn and grow, which means you're going to put yourself in a position where you're in over your head on occasion. And so, the people that aren't trying to grow, the people that are satisfied just doing their job, punching a clock, getting a paycheck and going home, they're not going to experience self-doubt because they're not really pushing themselves anywhere. And so it's counterintuitive, but once you really dig in, you start to realize, oh, this is actually a sign that I'm growing, that I'm developing, that I'm doing something innovative and impressive. And so I learned to see that as a sign. And in 2020, I wrote this book, Overcoming the Impostor, and it's really about the entrepreneur and the innovator's journey and battle with imposter syndrome, and what I've learned about how to overcome that voice of the inner critic that's trying to tell you you're not worthy, you're not going to make it, you're at risk of failure, and all of those lies that are really just a mental head game going on in our heads.
Give us an example, Kris, and if you're just stopping the scroll and you hopped onto the Courageous Conversations Live session, I'm having a conversation with Kris Kelso, author of Overcoming the Impostor. Kris, give us an example of a time where maybe you were sharing these principles in a keynote or a coaching session, a training workshop, and you shared them, and either in the session or afterwards, someone comes up to you and says, Kris, I feel seen, I feel understood. How did you know? Thank you for through this. Tell us one of those stories.
Well, there have been many. And one of the reasons that I eventually wrote a book is I started talking about imposter syndrome at conferences and events and one-on-one with clients. And so often I would have that experience where someone would say, oh my goodness, I had no idea. This is transformational. This is life-changing because you just freed me from the fear that I'm the only one that doesn't know what I'm doing. And that I'm isolated, that I'm at risk. And there was a conference a couple of years ago that I spoke at, and I talked about my own battle with imposter syndrome. And a business owner came up to me afterwards and said, "You changed my life today." He said that is why I was here. I needed to hear that because I have felt that for so long, and yet I thought it was just me. And so I've had a number of experiences. One that comes to mind is a client of mine who was he was a successful entrepreneur and then an in-demand consultant when he was eventually recruited by and hired by one of the biggest companies in his field. So he's gone from sort of owning his business and having control to being a part of this huge company. Mm-hmm. But this company hired him to build out an entirely new line of business. And it was something that he had never done before, that the company had never done before, but that he didn't have experience with. And as an entrepreneur, this would seem like it was right up his alley to build something new, but he became very, very insecure and started to get into this mindset that they expect me to have all the answers and I just don't. And the more he let that thought process, that feeling of I'm going to be exposed, they're going to find out that I don't know how this is supposed to work. It started to affect his performance. He became more conservative, more restricted in his thinking. He was, really trying to look like he knew what he was doing when he wasn't sure. And in a coaching session, in a conversation that we had, he had this light bulb moment where he realized the company didn't hire me because I have all the answers, because I know how to do this. We've not done this before. I haven't, the company hasn't, we don't know. They hired me to figure out the answers. Mm. They hired me because I'm a creator and innovator. And so it's okay to say, I don't know, but we can figure that out. It's okay to brainstorm freely and say, these are just ideas. I'm not sure what's going to work. We're going to have to test it out. And just that simple mindset shift from they expect me to know it all to they don't expect me to know it all. They hired me to figure it out. That made a huge difference. Within a few weeks, he was getting feedback from his leaders and the people that he was working with that his approach had changed, his attitude had changed, his ideas were flowing freely, and he was able to really be productive and to start to create things again because he quit managing his image. He quit worrying about being right or wrong and just focused on what they really hired him for, which was to experiment, to innovate, to try and learn and develop something new.
You know, I usually do this part when we're segueing out of our conversations and getting ready to sign off, but I'm just going to plug it in right now, Kris. I want to thank you in advance for the people who are going to purchase your book, the people who are going to work with you in a coaching, consulting capacity, the people who are going to bring you in for keynotes and training. I just want to thank you in advance for all of those people who've experienced you in this space and who are going to take that leap to work with you so they can overcome their imposter. Now, that being said, this is the section of Courageous Conversations that I call shameless plug time. What's the website? What's the social media handles? What's the coupon code?
Yeah.
How can we get in contact with you? First, specifically, who are you looking to work with? And then what's the best way you want them to reach out to you?
Yeah, typically most of my clients are owners, the owner operator of a small business. So anything from, just a handful of people and even 6 figures in revenue to up to, 25, 30, 50 million. And I've had a few clients outside of that range, but my sweet spot is that small business category of going from, individual or a very small team that's loosely organized to starting to grow up and put some structure around the business and build it into, a real structured organization. And in particular, I work a lot with owners who have realized that they need to start to work themselves out of the business. They need to move from the technician and doing the work to starting to lead and manage and eventually just moving into being the owner and being at the board level and making those big strategic decisions, but empowering people to do the work so that the company can eventually run without them. Yeah. And so to find out more about me, I'm pretty easy to find. If you remember, my name starts with a K, Kris Kelso, Kris. And the website is kriskelso.com. You can also find out specifically about the book at overcomingtheimposter.com. That's the name of the book, and that's the website. And on either one of those sites, you can get a free chapter, a sample chapter from the book, a free, and it's one of the best chapters of the book, honestly, in my opinion. I picked it because I think it's really rich and valuable on its own. It's not one of those teasers where you're going to read it and go, well, this doesn't make sense if I don't buy the whole book and figure it out. Now, this is really a valuable section of the book that will help you change your mindset and think of things in a different way. So at either one of those sites, you can get a free chapter of that book. And then I'm available as a coach, as a leadership development consultant, and as a keynote speaker. As you mentioned, I've been doing some conferences and leadership events, been able to speak to some really awesome and very diverse crowds about recognizing and overcoming imposter syndrome and the key tactics and strategies that I've learned in my years of studying this, how you counteract that negative thinking, those limiting beliefs, and the things that just hold you back. And the real shame of it all is that most of this is between our ears. It's all in our head. And so we put limits on ourselves that don't have anything to do with anybody else. And that's the bad news, that it's all on us. The good news is, because it's all on us, we have the power to change it. We have the ability to overcome, to make huge, significant differences in our lives without anyone else changing anything that they're doing, because it's simply a mindset and an approach and a way of thinking about our lives and our work and our careers.
Listen, folks, you've received 25 minutes of goodness today from Kris Kelso, author of Overcoming the Impostor. You're even getting a free, a sample chapter, one of the best chapters in his book. Go to kriskelso.com, overcomingtheimposter.com. Get that free chapter. But I'm going to nudge you a little bit more. There are many of you, you need to reach out to Kris. You need to send him an email, get connected, send him a message on LinkedIn, however you need to send him a carrier pigeon, whatever you got to do to reach out to him so that you can do some great work together. Kris, I want to thank you so much for hanging out today on Courageous Conversations and for pouring into our audience today.
Thank you, Pierre. You're very welcome. And you know what I'm going to do? This is spur of the moment. I didn't plan this. For the first 10 people that reach out to me directly and say, I heard you on Courageous Conversations, I'm going to give you a Kindle version of my book, a digital copy, a code you can redeem on Amazon to get the Kindle version of the book absolutely free. 10 people. I'm going to have to write that down so I remember what I said. But 10 people that reach out and just simply say, hey, I saw you on Courageous Conversations, and I'd love to get a copy of your book. And that's my gift to your audience. How is that for a Friday gift? Kris, thank you. Thank you so much. Listen, folks, take advantage of this. Take advantage of this offer, this experience, and don't just get the free Kindle download. Move that forward and have the conversation with Kris that will lead to even further transformation. Kris, thanks so much for being a great guest. I'm looking forward to having you on the Leading While Green podcast so we can continue to talk about overcoming the imposter and helping move forward. I'm looking forward to that as well. Thanks so much for having me on the show. This was really fun and a great way to kick off a Friday morning. Absolutely. We'll talk soon, okay? All right. See you, Pierre.